Garrett, you're insane. Why would you move from Miami to Chicago? Garrett, you're gonna get shot. Why are you going to O-Block? Why would you move to Chirac? I've heard this thousands of times over the past week or two, and it's because I just moved 3 days ago from Miami to Chicago, which I know sounds super backwards, so I'm here to make this video to actually explain why. Let me preface this by saying my hometown is in Illinois. It's a town of like 4,000 or 5,000 people, super small town, like Yeehaw, like USA is about what you could expect in a town in Illinois with 4,000 people. It is what it is. So very small town, very tight knit community. Everyone was super down to earth and like very nice to everyone. Like everyone knew everyone. And as great as that sounds, it was kind of like living under a rock. Like there wasn't a lot of diversity and a lot of different things going on in a town that small. That's what made me move 2 hours north to like Bloomington, Illinois, which is where I went to college. I did drop out, but I still kept living there for the next like 2-3 years or so while I was waiting on my girlfriend to graduate. And in spending that amount of time there, I started making a substantial amount of money. And in doing so, I wanted to kind of be around other people, like other successful entrepreneurs that were making a good amount of money too. And I got to a point where the circle I was hanging around with was like 40, 50, 55 years old. And it got to a point where when we were kind of talking numbers and like throwing stuff around, I realized that I was making like as much or more as everyone there. And it was kind of demotivating to be 21 years old at the time and be making as much as these guys that are more than double my age. And although, don't get me wrong, I was 21 years old, they still had stuff to teach me. They were making as much or less than me. So it didn't really make sense to learn from these guys. I wanted to be the smallest, the dumbest, and the poorest in the room of the new place that I moved to. So my girlfriend graduated and I was like, cool, let's pack up our bags and move somewhere. And we weren't sure where yet. So I traveled all over the US and across the board, I was literally searching for the place where I felt the dumbest, the poorest, and like just the smallest fish in the ocean, basically. And I landed on Miami. And Miami is just this very glorified place. When you think of Miami, at least for myself, before moving there, you think of, oh my God, all these big successful entrepreneurs, the beautiful weather, the palm trees, the beaches, the oceans. And of course, there's like a big club scene, like nightlife, which is whatever. And that's kind of what drew me there, was when I went there, there's really nice cars everywhere. A lot of people made money, had a lot of stuff going on. They were hustling. They all had businesses. And it just seemed like my vibe, like my type of people. And on top of that, I wanted to be as far from my hometown as physically possible because I feel like there's so much growth in just moving across the country and like being forced to figure it out. And on top of that, living in Bloomington, Illinois, where my living expenses were like $1,000 a month. My living expenses 5-6x when I moved to Miami. And it was really good for me because it forced me to have pressure again. Because when you're making as much as 50-year-olds and your living expenses are like basically nothing, it's really hard to be pushed to grow and do more and prosper when your environment doesn't really show that. So Miami was a phenomenal place to have that growth environment and also have like a financial push to be like, hey, things are expensive here, like go make more money. And that's exactly what happened. And honestly, Miami was phenomenal. The reasons I moved there were essentially for the phenomenal weather, being near the beach, the networking aspect of things, and being around heavy hitters that are doing numbers that are closer to my age. And when I moved there, I didn't exactly get that, to be honest. There was a lot of people in the online space that I really idolized that were doing really big numbers from what it looked like from the outside looking in. But then I'm sure you guys are all asking yourselves, like, why would a successful 23-year-old entrepreneur leave such a great place like Miami? And to be honest, I think the biggest driving factor was just the people and I guess the lack of people there that I wanted there. So a big part of it was I was here essentially to be around people that do numbers and do all these big things that are closer to my age so that I can learn from them. And although there 1,000% are people there, a lot of the people that I met, they were very underwhelming when I went to meet them. They said they made all this money and stuff. And then I went and met them and like, oh yeah, that was just like 1 month. And then they were like making exactly as much money as I was. But I will say a lot of people traveled to Miami. So I saw a lot of people that were flying in and met a lot of really cool people that were doing really big numbers. And there were a few people that did do really good numbers. But as a whole, as a big generalization, most of the people I met were underwhelming. My family wasn't there. And I really realized like, it doesn't matter how professionally successful I am. If I don't have like my family and like my girlfriend's family around to like see it, what's the point of all this? And that was a big realization I hit as it was like hitting the holidays. Miami as a whole just kind of felt not like I don't want to say like a soulless city, but it just didn't feel that like wholesome. You don't see like families walking around, like spending quality time together. You see people like drinking and blasting Bad Bunny like all the time. And it's just very like fast paced party culture that I just really didn't jive with. Don't get me wrong. If you're a single guy in your 20s and you're making a bunch of cash, like great place to be. And you like partying and like going out all the time, great place to be. It just really wasn't in me. I didn't have the intrigue. And I guess just the people as a whole, my hometown and just Illinois and the Midwest in general are just super down to earth people. You go run into someone in Starbucks and you want to just ask them how their day's going and how their life's going and what they do and like how everything's going or anything you could help them with, or just like, this is the vibe. And there were multiple times when I was in Miami where people just weren't that. I would talk to people and it just felt like a burden to them when I was speaking to them. And it was very strange that no one wanted to like small talk and chit chat and just like talk to a random stranger. They were just a little bit more cold and like standoffish in my personal opinion, relative to like what I was used to. And for entrepreneurs in particular, it was kind of like horse blinders on. If you benefit me or benefit my business, like cool, I'll talk to you so I can have this transactional relationship with you. But if you're not that, then like get out of my way. And then lastly, the food was just mid. Like the food was not that good. I like going out to eat is like my favorite hobby. And like, I never got the best food there. There's like some crazy bougie food. If you spend like $500, $1,000 on a meal, you'll have a great meal. But like, that's just not me. In Chicago, that's all there. Chicago is phenomenal for this. But then you have to ask yourself like, okay, cool, not Miami. Why Chicago? I think anyone who's not been to Chicago, when they say Chicago or think of Chicago, they think of like people getting murdered in the streets and like O Block and like, you know, all this. And this is like not where I live. Like you can kind of see the view a little bit here. This is like, it's a good life over here. I love Chicago. Reason being is like, it's the biggest city that's close to both my girlfriend Michelle's family. They're like 30 minutes away. And like my family is like 3-4 hours away. We're close to both families, but we're still in a big city. And like, I need a big city for the sake of like networking and being closer to other entrepreneurs. That's there. Also, everything a city brings, which is like amazing food. The food here is amazing. It's like a nice melting pot. There's so many different cultures that have quality food, and I could die for the food in Chicago. It's so good. And I think just as a whole, like the city is so much more wholesome, which again is probably surprising to you guys who've not been to Chicago, but it really is. There's families walking around, there's parks, and that's the biggest reason. That's the kind of the motive behind the move, as in why a guy would leave his hometown in smaller towns to go to Miami, and then a year later switch back and then move to Chicago, and kind of the reason behind all this stuff. So I know this is very backwards of what you usually hear. Usually people are leaving Chicago for Miami, and that makes so much more sense. So I hope this kind of helped you guys understand maybe a little bit more about me and how I think, and spend a little bit of time inside Garrett's brain and like why I would make a decision like this. And if you stayed to the end of this video, I need you to subscribe to all my socials so I can show you guys the bright side of Chicago that no one talks about, because it's such a beautiful city. And lastly, subscribe specifically on this YouTube channel so you can see more videos just like this.